You're listening to Talking to Teens, where we speak with leading experts from a variety of disciplines about the art and science of parenting teenagers. I'm your host, Andy Earle. We're here today with Shane Trotter to talk about his book, Setting the Bar, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Era of Distraction, Dependency, and Entitlement. Shane is a writer, educator, and high school strength and conditioning coordinator who has a passion for research on education and on how we can challenge kids to be their best selves and live their best lives. We often talk about values on the show and how to impart values to your children and live in a family that's based in a strong set of values. But Shane's going to talk a little bit about how there can be good values and bad values and what the difference is. We're also going to look at bullying and why the way that we often respond to bullying and the anti-bullying mentality that a lot of adults adopt actually can often make bullying worse, and what some of the research suggests about that. And we're going to get into learning disabilities and how the individualized education plans we put together to help students with learning disabilities can be beneficial, but also can be a double-edged sword. In general, we're going to be talking about how we often as adults are encouraged or feel the need to lower our standards for children rather than setting the bar at a high level. We're going to see all different kinds of ways this manifests and how we can start setting the bar higher. All that and more is coming up today. Shane, thank you so much for being on the show with us. I just finished reading your book, Setting the Bar, Preparing Our Kids to Thrive in an Era of Distraction, Dependency, and Entitlement. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to write this? Where did this topic come from? And clearly this is something you've been thinking about a lot and that's close to your heart. So what led to you writing it all down?
So I am a teacher, or was a teacher. Now I'm in the same school that I taught at, and I've worked into a different role as the strength and conditioning coordinator. And so I've been here for over a decade now. I'm 32. And it was just this feeling that hit me in the gut over and over again, where this overwhelming sense that the norms that our kids are taking on are setting them up for failure. And more than that we are not preparing our kids to thrive in this world, that they were being set up for failure. And so, particularly, I started writing the book before I adopted my two kids. But, now with a almost 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, it became more and more prescient. We have to adapt. We have to start addressing these failing norms and giving a better model of how to live, how to thrive than what we're putting forward.
Can you talk a little bit about those failing norms? What are those? What does that look like?
Sure. So I start the book with a scene of me riding my bike to work. I ride my bike to work every day, and passing a bus stop of kids going to the high school. We all have memories of ourselves at a bus stop, or most people. And for me, it was like, yep. Hey, you're there with your friends, you're joking every day. There's kind of this natural back and forth. Maybe some teasing, maybe, whatever it is. Just but you're active, you're engaged. You might be huddled up, chilly, or whatever, depending on the weather. But there's this kind of connected sense that happens when you are a teenager at riding the bus, or
totally.
Young adult. And what I'm saying is the exact opposite of that. No one's standing; they're all sitting. It's like 7
right.
kids sitting on the curb, head tilted, basically feeling as they scroll through their phones, completely disconnected. Yeah. And it's just like, right. Kicked in the face, like it's the Wall-E dystopia. It's like, whoa. This is not how humans are meant to live. This is not, this is not right. The technology is certainly, I don't know if it's the sole source of the issue, it may be, and it's certainly a tremendous exacerbating factor. There's a phrase, the medium is the message, and so clearly it's our technology has affected how we the way we perceive the world, the way our news is being funneled to us, and the millions of messages we're seeing each day, all the marketing and everything, changes us at a very deep level into our subconscious, that our expectations of the world, or where we look for for meaning, all these things. So certainly the technological norms, I think, are untenable, and those are happening, not just for our kids, but for our parents as well. The way email has crept into every, email, which was supposed to make work more seamless, has only just changed the expectations and made us feel like we have to be available at all times, and so there's this our minds are really, really being affected by the world right now.
Yeah.
The norms surrounding technology being the most obvious today, but also I address the norms around eating norms that have changed significantly since the 1960s. Family norms, habit norms that go into the pace of being a parent today, the select ball schedule, or whatever it is, maybe, the music teacher, whatever, but we're just funneling kids all the time. So it's kind of pushed us towards the convenience food life. And there's this lack of family ritual at home, this lack of coming around a dinner table at night. And then, of course, after that, we, rather than congregating in any sense, there tends to be a falling into our own individual screens. So, we're seeing a disconnection in society broadly.
You talked about some interesting research in your book, because I've heard before about the studies with the rats. Rats will just, like, if there's cocaine in their cage or something, they'll just like keep taking it, or morphine or something, over and over and over again, until they basically put themselves into a coma or kill themselves or something like that. But actually, you kind of talk about some interesting caveats or follow-up studies to that sort of add a really interesting dynamic to those findings.
Yeah. So the basic paradigm we've all accepted is that it's basically like a linear equation. These are hyper addictive drugs, like our phones.
Totally.
Yeah. So once you pop, the fun don't stop.
Right.
Once you have a taste, you're addicted, and you're going to go back to it.
Can't do just one.
Until you OD. But what Dr. Bruce Alexander, he looked at it, and he's like, well, let's wait a second. These rats are they're social beings. They're social species, just like humans. Humans, we find meaning, we find purpose, we find happiness in connection. And rats are the same way, just maybe to a less sophisticated degree. So he said, these are all depressed rats we're studying. Because these rats are just living in cages, isolated.
Yeah, you take one rat and put it in a little cage all by itself. Well, yeah, of course it's going to have some problems.
What would you do if you've been living by yourself in a cage forever and someone gave you drugs, right? Yeah.
Hey, great, something to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So his idea was, let's take a bunch of rats, and compare them to these rats, and let's take a bunch of rats and put them in a rat haven. And he created one. He called it Rat Park. There was everything fun for rats to do, right? There's tons of rats, so social, males and females. So there was rat babies came along, they got to do that. There was the wheel to run on, there's stuff to hide behind, just it was a natural setting. It was Eden. So then he exposed those rats to the same, they had the water choice. They could have water or water mixed with morphine, cocaine, or something to that extent. It changed from study to study. But the finding that was so overwhelming is none of these rats overdosed. In fact, all of them eventually tried the drug solution and came back to just water, and then stuck with just water. They were not interested. It's all on a non-conscious level, obviously, with a rat, but they were not interested in drugging themselves into oblivion when they were in a fulfilling environment. which
Mm.
to me is just has profound implications when we look at a little background too that is worth noting. Drug overdoses had never exceeded 20,000 in a year prior to the year 2000. So prior to the year 2000, we'd never seen over 20,000 drug overdoses in the U.S. in a year, and
Interesting. Okay.
we're above 70,000 in the past year. So yes, we're seeing a dramatic increase of drug overdoses. And
Wow.
of course, skyrocketing depression, anxiety, suicide rates at all age levels have gone up.
Yeah.
So I think the implications from the Rat Park study are pretty profound, in that we're seeing
Yeah.
this kind of crisis of meaning, crisis of connection going on, and I think that is the underlying issue right now. Thoreau said many are hacking at the branches of evil, but few are striking at the roots, or something to that effect. So if we're going to strike at the
Mm.
roots, this is the roots of our issue.
And I think there are so many ways in which we put teenagers in the little cage, so we don't put them in the rat Eden,
Yeah.
and so many aspects of teenage life really are not fulfilling, and we're not putting them in a situation where they're going to thrive and feel purpose and connection and excitement. And what do we expect? We're making them stressed out and bored, and just forced to do things that they don't want to do all day, and then we wonder why they want to use various drugs and devices and risky behaviors to find something exciting or distract themselves from the monotony of life.
Sure.
And I think a lot of ways, social media is a drug of choice for our current generations.
Yeah, it's certainly it has had kind of a narcotic effect, hasn't it?
Yeah.
and, and it does kind of the same thing. So on one hand, you could say
Yeah.
that the social media is making is incentivizing kids to put themselves in their own little rat park, go to their room and scroll, lay on the bed and scroll, kind of a typical teenage behavior to spend hours that way. But the flip
Yeah.
side is that it could also be the other way in too, that in the absence of all this meaning, that is more attractive. I think it's a two-way street and it works both ways. But in the
Totally.
absence of meaning and in the absence of all these things, yeah, they're using it as the drug.
So I thought this was really interesting. We talk a lot about values on the show and how to instill good values in teenagers and have strong values as a family. And you talk about some ideas from Mark Manson, and the possibility that there's good values and not as good values, or strong values and not so strong values. And I really thought this was interesting. It could be helpful for people to think about how we can sort of examine our values and how we can develop values that are more reality based, socially constructive, immediate, and controllable, as opposed to the opposite. Can you talk a little bit about what makes good values?
Yes, absolutely. Values are kind of an obsession of mine, so I'm glad you asked that. The idea being that good values should be reality based, socially constructive, realistic. They should be determined under your own control, because you can't control whether people like you or not,
Yeah,
but you can control whether you have a code of integrity, an honor code, an idea of what you think is right and wrong, and whether you adhere to that. So you can always meet that expectation. These principles, reality based. This is the pursuit of truth in general, and trying to live an authentic life, and accepting hard
yeah,
truths, which I think is fundamental to maturity. Being able to have constructive feedback. So a lot of this is also rooted in basic maturity. and the wisdom that tends to be practiced in almost every great civilization throughout time. You can go to Taoism, you can go to Buddhism, you can go to Stoicism, you can go to the cardinal virtues of Christianity. There are these universals that aren't restrictive to any specific religion or anything that civilizations have kind of come to.
Totally, yeah.
And so I talk also in chapter 3 about cognitive behavior therapy, and I see a lot of overlap between values and cognitive behavior therapy, which, the reality-based ideas, cognitive behavior therapy is very interested in breaking down kind of this emotional view and helping you to come to a mature lens on the world, to accept where you're wrong and to grow your maturity. And again, socially constructive being such a key idea too. The ability to have deeper meaning. One of the things that are so lacking for our teens today is that they grow up in a very individualistic world. It's a hyper individualistic world, and it has been since, especially so since the marketing revolution after World War II. And that is wonderful, and that we are comfortable, and things are safer than they've ever been. They're convenient, but there's a downside to this too. That if we're telling kids that there's no right or wrong outside of your own mind, if we're raising kids in a consumerist environment where they're always pushed to do what is comfortable in the moment, and there's always all these messages telling them they need this, need that. The drive of their life is basically just to serve their own wants, and there's no idea of something worth sacrificing for, an ideal worth sacrificing for, an obligation to community, or that their behavior should be socially constructive, should have a benefit on the world, then they will lack meaning. So good values are socially constructive. They add something to the world. And as any parent knows, once you start to make sacrifices for something bigger than yourselves, like a kid, you become happier than you've ever been. It's like, whoa, this isn't, why does anyone become a parent? It makes no sense if you just look at like what it's going to do to your life.
Let me just give up my freedom, take a bunch of money and just throw it at this thing.
Throw it away. Lose all sorts of sleep. But somehow we're happier for it, right? So it's, I think that's kind of a microcosm for what good values are.
And so many parents, we feel like, I just want my kids to be happy, and that's the be all end all. Is like, what do I really want? I just want them to be happy. But that isn't necessarily the message to send, because if we just try and do things that make us happy, then we paradoxically kind of miss out on a lot of more deeper types of happiness. And
it's so my whole chapter 5 really is trying to clarify this idea. But it's that happiness, it depends on how you define happiness, and we need a much more mature concept of what happiness is. I think what the research tends to bear out, and what ancient wisdom tends to bear out, is that the greatest happiness comes in self-actualization, what the psychologist Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. And the greatest happiness comes from becoming something greater, from having an ideal and becoming more yourself, and approaching your potential as a human being to be a better human, becoming more capable, more admirable, more, to become more yourself. So rather than a cumulative adding up of pleasure and subtracting of pain, real happiness is a lot more sophisticated than that.
You talk about some interesting research in here about a lot of parents, talk about screen time and how do I handle screen time? Should I limit screen time? But that actually we need to look a little bit deeper in terms of not just necessarily just screen time of all types of screens, but just looking specifically at smartphones is different than video games or other types of screen time, and it's different even between how it is used and how it affects boys
Yeah.
versus girls.
Yeah, that was really interesting research done by Dr. Gene Twenge and Jonathan Haidt. I think everyone's borne the brunt of social media, but girls have been affected even more. Boys obviously tend to navigate a lot to things like online games, which are community based. They can play with their friends. They're talking with their friends. They share missions. They are a
Yeah,
somewhat constructive outlet to some degree. I'm not crazy about video games because I like actual real world physical connection,
right,
and
right.
yeah, I'd rather them paintball than pretend to, but but still, if you're just looking at acute emotional psychological effects, that seems to be
Yeah,
far more healthy than the social media, which
yeah,
all kids are attracted to, but disproportionately girls have been, young women have been,
mm,
and you can only imagine what that does when you're, first of all, the amount of advertisement you're being subjected to, and advertisement
yeah,
is intentional. We don't have to make it an evil thing, but we have to understand what it's doing. It's intentionally trying to plant messages about things you need, and it's intentionally
right,
trying to manipulate you. I mean, that is the end goal of an advertisement.
right.
So it's planting a lot of
Why
seeds, like,
tell you why you need stuff to be happy,
yes.
basically.
So it's
Yeah,
exactly. So rather than creating a sense in you that you can be happy without things, it's creating a sense that you
right.
won't be happy until you have things. That's
You
inherent.
lack, you need.
You lack.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. So do that 10,000 times a day, and it's going to have a psychological effect on you.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you throw on the filters that you can do on the pictures, and
yeah,
the effect of posting comments and looking for likes and looking for this, and it is overwhelming. And me being someone who is acutely very aware of these effects, it's anyone can fall into this.
there's also really interesting things in your book about real world bullying, and and specifically whether it's a good idea to try and get rid of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of agrees bullying's bad. We don't want people to be bullying each other. But then where that kind of leads us to, or where we end up with, or this idea that as we start to get rid of things, we look for ever increasingly smaller instances of it. And I wonder, like, how you think parents should respond to bullying or treat bullying.
Yeah, so it's all like an onion, right? So it goes to deeper philosophy, I think, has to be uncovered first. But that was interesting research to me, for me to read and learn more about as well. At the end of the day, I think that we have to understand that the world is too complex to create a perfect enough system to offset every potential risk and harm. That what we've always known is that the only thing sophisticated enough to handle the complexities of the world is the individual human. So what we should be doing is creating a stronger, more capable human who has the ability to weather the inevitable hardships that will come its way, and perhaps even thrive because of them, which is often the
Yeah,
case in the most successful people. All those hardships are what revealed a stronger, individual capability in them, and that opened the door to all their greatest accomplishments and happiness. So that I think that understanding is fundamental. With that, the other background is yes, the blue dot study, as I refer to it in the book.
yeah,
Perhaps the most important thing for people to understand about human nature that in the modern world, and it's they put people in front of a computer screen, and they were shown a succession of dots, and they were tasked with deciding whether a dot was blue or not blue. Okay, and
Okay.
the
Yeah.
dots range from blue to purple. All right, and they're on a spectrum, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so they saw 1,000, and within the first 100, they had about a 50-50 split between actually blue, technically blue blues, and technically purple purples.
Okay.
But as they got towards 1,000, more and more were purple, and yet they found just as many blues. It still ended up 50. So by the end of it, the last 100 were almost all purples, and they're still coming up with about a 50-50 blue to purple split. And this is done in trial after trial. They found the same with faces. Do people look mean or not mean, basically, and they go through
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
And the same thing, as you find more and more nice faces, people still find just as many
Yeah.
means because they're set up to
Yeah.
find
Right.
those. And the same thing they found with unethical business proposals. If there are, if they're looking for unethical business proposals, and the number of unethical business proposals goes down, people find just as many. This is
Yeah.
super, super important for understanding the human psychology. They call it, the technical term is prevalence-induced concept change. But it's that when the signal you're looking for is reduced, you don't necessarily find less of it. You change your definition, so you're finding just
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So, apply
Right.
that to the modern world, where our idea of trauma has broadened. Our expectations about how comfortable we should be. Our idea is, just of hardship in general. Mark Manson, he's argued that our brain naturally seeks problems.
Yeah. Right.
It's a problem-seeking mechanism. Really, our meaning is that it comes from having better problems. If you feel a sense of purpose, then you feel that there's a problem you're excited to solve, right?
Yeah.
Something you care about and care about doing something about. So if we are a problem-seeking organism, a pain-seeking organism, natural pains in our life are reduced, we're going to find just as many pains.
We're here today with Shane Trotter talking about how we often end up failing to properly challenge kids. And we're looking at how we can set the bar higher. Here's a look at what's coming up in the second half of the show.
If you're a reading family, you got it made. In books, there's just so much fodder for deeper living. All the incentives are bringing teachers' attention to the least successful, because they got to get the passing rates up. They got to get, make sure that the graduation rates are higher.
Totally.
And to the students with disabilities. Sometimes there are, anywhere from 15% to as much as almost 50% of a classroom with some sort of 504 individualized education plan, something to that effect.
Wow.
And so the people don't understand how much work that is to individualize for that many students. So teachers, knowing that they trying and then realizing they can't keep everything straight, just bring the level on everyone down. When adults are always issuing verdicts, often the kid who's dubbed as a bully, there is clear-cut bullying behavior. That's far less common today. Far less common.
Yeah,
Look at the
right.
research. So most of it tends to be kind of squabbling. It's cyberbullying is a real thing. The internet kind of encourages behavior you'd never do in real life. So,
depersonalization.
Yes, exactly. But the triangulation effect is that when a teacher or adult comes in to issue the verdict, whoever is dubbed the bully or feels dubbed the bully often feels that that's been done wrongly.
Yeah.
So now there's
Right.
that relationship between the adult and himself or herself is broken a little bit, and and if this is in a school setting, it creates some negative feelings there about school, perhaps.
Yeah. Right.
But also tends to lead to a vindictive response.
Yep.
And what they've seen is that the kids who seek help the most tend to be bullied the most, which is, or maybe not, maybe it isn't bully, but have the most issues.
Right.
Basically, we're not equipping our kids to be self-reliant, and in the process, we're crippling them by handling their issues for them. We're crippling their ability to handle them for themselves.
Want to hear the full interview? Sign up for a subscription today. You get access to all the interviews I've conducted, as well as new episodes weeks before the general public. It's completely affordable, and your subscription helps support the work we do here at Talking to Teens. Thanks for listening.